Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am Rana Riodika, co-chair of NDNY's Intercultural Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and I currently serve on Notre Dame's Asian Pacific Alumni Board. Thank you for joining us tonight for our fourth Beyond the Comfort Zone panel. The Beyond the Comfort Zone series provides a platform for diverse voices from the Notre Dame community to engage in open, honest, and meaningful dialogue. In recognition of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, tonight's event is a collaboration between NDNY and the Asian Pacific Alumni Board of Notre Dame. Our theme tonight is Stop AAPI Hate. The China virus, the Kong flu. You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from. I'm sure we've all heard this senseless rhetoric that blames Asians for the spread of COVID-19. This dangerous rhetoric has pinned the Asian community as the scapegoats for the pandemic, causing a recent surge in verbal and physical attacks on Asians. Research released by the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center shows that 3,800 incidents of hate and discrimination against the AAPI community were reported in the past year. While some of these hate crimes have seen national coverage, like the Atlanta shooting that left 8 people dead, of which 6 were Asian women, there are many other incidents that don't get national coverage, like the death of 30-year-old Filipino Navy veteran Angelo Quinto in California, who died the very same way that George Floyd died, with the knee of a police officer on his neck. And I'm sure there are more incidents that don't even get reported at all. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that New York City experienced the highest increase in anti-Asian hate crimes during the first quarter of 2021, with 180 reported hate crimes from January 1 to May 2. And again, I'm sure there are still many incidents that go unreported. As we listen to our panelists this evening and hear about their reactions to these current events and their lived experience, let's remember that we are ND. We are not done. There is still a lot of work to do to achieve the social justice and racial equity that we need, want, and deserve. As Domers, we have a responsibility to answer the call to be a force for good. Let's work together to fight against the anti-Asian sentiments, racism, and xenophobia that plagues our country. And with that thought, I would like to introduce our moderator, Juliette LaChapelle, who many of you already know. Juliette is a 1987 graduate of the Program of Liberal Studies at Notre Dame. She's also graciously moderated all of our Beyond the Comfort Zone panels and has led engaging conversations. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Juliette.
Thank you, Rona. Thank you, Rona, and thank you to the entire Notre Dame, New York team who continues to put on these this series. It really is incredibly heartwarming for me to see so many people engaged from all levels of the university, students, alumni, faculty, administration. It really is transformational, and that's, I think, what you intended. It also just gives me hope that we are not only just transforming ourselves, but we really are affecting real change at the university itself. I'd also like to thank the panelists who have put in quite a bit of time over the last week preparing and thinking about these questions and struggling with me with the issues. Thank you for your stories and sharing your time with me. Finally, thank you for all of our viewers who are out there. I know that you're going to find this to be a very rich and important conversation. I'd like to give you a little bit of a roadmap. Everybody on the panel kind of knows where we're headed, but give you a little bit of a roadmap as to where we're going in our discussion. We're going to start out with student experiences, both past and present, so that we can kind of climb back onto campus. Those of you who are watching who are alumni or in the general community. And in the course of that discussion, we're going to talk about and update our understanding as to what the university is doing in terms of diversity and inclusion work, what their efforts look like currently. I know a lot of goals were set. And then finally, we are going to take up this incredibly important issue that Rona has just raised, which is this frightening rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. We do have the ones that Rona mentioned. We also have the in addition to the Atlanta shootings in March, we have the shooting in Indianapolis in April. Of 8 people, 4 of whom were Asian as well, and then just recently the dismemberment of a Vietnamese man very close to Notre Dame in Fort Wayne. So it seems to be just increasing over time and at a truly alarming rate. So this is really an incredibly important discussion that we're going to be having here. So let's start by doing introductions and getting to know everybody who's here joining us, and then we'll launch into our discussion. Rachel, if you could start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Biscocho. I am the current president for the Notre Dame Club of New York. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2016. I lived in Farley Hall. I majored in sociology and pre-health studies with a minor in Chinese. And as I said, I am NDNY's current president. I'm also NDNY's first Asian president. While I was on campus, I was very involved with FASO, which is the Filipino American Student Organization, and I helped choreograph different routines of traditional dances during our annual showcase. I'm really excited to be here tonight.
Thank you, Rachel. Henry Mark, can we get you to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Henry Mark. I'm a graduate of the university in 1992 with a bachelor's in business administration and a focus in marketing. I lived in Zomhall. I most recently was vice president of global merchandising and planning for the Collective Group here in New York. I was born in South Bend. Oops.
Yeah. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. You
were born in South Bend.
Yep, and I've been in New York for about 23 years. And I was the co-founder of the Asian American Association on campus.
Great. Thank you, Henry. And Helen, you're up next.
Hi guys, my name is Helen Go. I'm the current president of the Asian American Association here on campus. I'm a junior studying neuroscience and behavior with a minor in anthropology, and I hope to go into medicine after leaving Notre Dame. Really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Helen. And Charlotte Harris.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Harris. I'm a current Master of Nonprofit Administration student at Mendoza College of Business. I did my undergrad at Wellesley College and graduated in 2016. And I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I will be doing executive search consulting once I finish my program in this May.
Great. And Michelle, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Michelle Hawks. I'm Director of the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies in the Q School for Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. I've been at Notre Dame since 2016. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I studied Chinese language and literature at Leiden University in Holland. First went to China in 1986. That's now 35 years ago. I spent 20 years teaching at SOAS at the University of London, the School of Oriental and African Studies. And as I said, I joined Notre Dame in 2016 as a professor of Chinese literature, but first and foremost as the founding director of the Liu Institute for Asian Studies. And thank you so much for allowing me to take part in this discussion.
Thank you for being here. And for all of our viewers, the Liu Institute, Michelle is going to get into more detail about it, but it has been a very important institute in this moment that we're dealing with. So to get started, I'd like to start with you, Henry. You were the founder, as you said, of the Asian American Association. It sounds like back in 1991. Is that right?
Yeah,
Have to be right?
1992 is when I graduated, but yeah, we started around 91, 92.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your experience on campus. Why you went to Notre Dame, how you acclimated when you first got there, and why you went on to found the
Sure.
American Association.
Sure. Obviously the university is known for its, academic excellence, and, growing up in South Bend, my family really wanted me to stay local, and, encouraged me to go to Notre Dame. It was right there, it was so easy. With the little push, I decided that, let's go and try it out. And it was the best decision of my life. Talk about inclusivity, and openness of my peers, and the people that I interacted with in my immediate circle, gave me such a fantastic experience. And so for me, when I look back at my Notre Dame experience, it was all positive. I think that, as I entered Notre Dame, definitely was aware of how homogeneous the environment was. And for me, just even looking through the freshman, what they call the dog book,
Right.
Just flipping through it, very little Asian faces, people of color. And I would say maybe it was about 2% Asian, maybe that's even high. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was really make an impact and influence, the university in trying to really push for more Asian students to be on campus. I think that being in the middle of the Midwest in a small town is not necessarily one of its features, but there's so many great things that need to be brought to light. And, I think just encouraging the university and administration to really push forward and recruit Asian students, who may not necessarily have heard of the university, or may not necessarily have the financial means to afford an education, be able to organize and found a club in that manner. So that was kind of really the realization of why we began the Asian American Association.
And how large was the association when you first started it? Did people come flocking in, or did it take a while?
No, I mean, it was probably about 15 to 20 max our first year. It was, not too many people. It was all of our friends, the co-founders, and we just recruited our own friends. My sister was part of it. But it became, it grew after that. So it, what started off to be 15, I don't even know what the membership is these days. It looks like it's, 100 plus.
Yeah, well, we'll find out from Helen in a bit. Henry, if you will tell, because you told me this story and I just thought it was so priceless. Tell the story of Father Hesburgh and your parents in the restaurant.
Sure.
What a moment.
Yeah. So
not a moment, it sounds like several moments.
Yes, several moments. So growing up in South Bend, my family had a Chinese restaurant. They started in the 60s. And it was one of the few places at that time where you can get a great meal. And Father Hesburgh would frequently come to our restaurant for dinner. And, I recall bussing his table, waiting on him, and even sitting down and having great conversations with him. And, what a man he was. He was very global. And, for that time, that was unique, so open-minded. And I think that, really, what encouraged me also to go was, and influenced me to go was Father Hesburgh.
Just having those conversations with him, and him even did he try to speak Mandarin to you? Is that what happened?
Yes. So we speak, but yeah, he tried speaking Mandarin to me. Of course, I don't understand that dialect, but the fact that he was so willing to try to communicate and make that connection, and he did that to everybody. And that's, the reason why I wanted to go to Notre Dame was for the mere fact that if he was president of, the university, what the university potential could be.
Right. And he certainly did push it and shape it for a long time. All right. Well, Helen, I'd like to move on to you. And you're still on mute, but if you could talk a little bit about your experience at Notre Dame, tell us what you were looking for when you selected Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think the greatest pull for me coming to Notre Dame was the community here. I think initially when looking at colleges, Notre Dame wasn't necessarily on my radar at first, but my mom had gone to one of their information sessions in California, and she thought it was a great school and encouraged me to look more into Notre Dame. And I think between applying and committing, a lot of the upperclassmen that I talked to and a lot of the alumni that I was able to speak with, really emphasized the community that they found here on campus, the support that they got from their fellow peers, from the faculty here on campus. And, everybody I talked to pretty much gushed about, how great the community here was. And so I think that was the main draw for me coming to campus, because at my high school, I went to a very large public high school with over 4,000 students. The environment was very competitive, and I don't think there was too much of that community or that school spirit. And so I was really looking for the opposite of that environment when choosing a school.
So something more cooperative.
Yeah.
And you described to me your experiences during that first week. And I think we all sort of have traumatic experiences during the first month or two of school. But tell us what that was like for you and what turned it around for you.
Yeah, definitely the first week on campus. I experienced, I guess, what you would call like a culture shock, coming from like a community that was pretty much 80% Asian, I guess, coming to campus in the Midwest was very shocking for me. There were a lot of people on campus, didn't have the same experiences or knew about my culture, and so that was definitely difficult to get adjusted to at first. And definitely I had a lot of difficulty, I think, making friends in the first couple weeks on campus. I kind of felt alienated at times, people didn't necessarily understand my cultural background. And, at times I felt that they weren't willing to understand it either. I was, mistaken for other Asian freshmen on campus. And so definitely the adjustment was difficult, but eventually I think I did find my communities on campus through AAA, the Asian American Association, and through some of the other clubs I got involved with.
Okay. And tell us, it sounds to me, I've heard it from Rachel, I've heard it from you, discussions about the Asian American Association's retreat and how, life-changing that was. Tell us a little bit about that. Because this is just 2 years ago, basically, for you.
Yeah. So AAA traditionally has a freshman retreat for all the incoming Asian American freshmen. And basically at the retreat, we get to meet upperclassmen who are like our table leaders, and they kind of guide us through adjusting to college life and being Asian American on campus. And I think it was at this retreat that I met so many passionate leaders in the Asian American community at Notre Dame, who really inspired me, I think, to get more involved in the community and to sort of want to change things, I think, for Asian Americans on this campus. And so that was where I really got involved in the AAA community.
And what you said to change things for the community, what was it at that retreat that so inspired you to go down that route? You had mentioned somebody in particular who spoke about assimilating at Notre Dame. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the seniors at the freshman retreat actually spoke to me about there was a policy change, I guess, before I entered Notre Dame, where students, instead of living 2 years on campus, they now had to live 3 years on campus. And this particular senior mentioned to me that there was a lot of pushback initially in AAA and in a lot of the other cultural organizations on campus against this decision, because the majority of students who were moving off campus at the time were students of color, from minority groups on campus. And they felt that by changing the residence requirement from 2 to 3 years, the university wasn't necessarily addressing the problem that some of the problems within residence communities that were pushing these students to move off campus in the first place. And that was, I think, definitely an issue that I don't think has been necessarily addressed to this day.
That was my next question, so thank you for answering it ahead of time. All right, Charlotte, I'd like to move on to you. You were at Wellesley, then you were at an executive search firm, and then made your way to Notre Dame. Want to ask you some questions around Notre Dame, but also about your experience with executive search firms and what's happening with the promotion of Asian and Pacific Islanders within these search firms. But first, let's get to your experience at Notre Dame. You're getting your nonprofit master's, essentially. Tell us what it was like coming from the East Coast and then settling into Notre Dame in I assume, a much less diverse environment.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet. And so, like you mentioned, I had been in Boston, where Chinatown is right there. There's a lot of diversity of people and cultural events. And I had grown up in the Midwest, so I had some understanding of what moving to Indiana would be like. However, I think it's still a little bit shocking. I remember coming the first weekend and really craving boba. And I looked on my Google Maps and it wasn't clear where, there wasn't just like a boba place that I could go to. And I one time looked up dim sum, and the closest place was Chicago. And so I think initially, the first thing I'd been thinking was, the food that I normally like to eat or treat myself, it's not here in this town. And in my program, it is a small program. There's only 30 people in my cohort, but I am the only Asian student there. So that was, I think, an adjustment as well. But I think what other people have said about Notre Dame being a welcoming community, I think that is true. That people really wanted me to be excited about South Bend and share why they loved being at Notre Dame. And there's some folks in my program who were here for undergrad and were great around sharing things that they like to do on campus and giving tours and giving great suggestions. So I did feel welcome in the sense of coming here. However, there were moments that I definitely was missing particular foods and things that I had really taken for granted, being in Boston or being at Wellesley.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the problem of the lack of diversity at Mendoza, and particularly in your program, and how it sometimes felt like you were being put into the role of a diversity trainer because some of the faculty weren't able to address the issues that came up in class. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that when there are only a few folks who represent diversity, you're kind of called upon to speak on behalf of entire cultures or communities to either share that perspective, or even if you aren't called upon it, if there is a discussion in class that feels like, you know, you kind of need to speak up to add some more nuance or clarity around an issue. And I think in, you know, a nonprofit administration program that is so related to social justice and serving others, there are going to be moments in our curriculum that we're having hard conversations around race. And I think that there were a few moments this year where some students in my program might had said things that were a little bit inappropriate or racist, and were, I think, beyond microaggressions, and faculty members weren't very equipped to either de-escalate the situation or kind of unpack, you know, why do you think this way about this group of people, or, you know, how did you get to this initial thought to here? And in one of our classes, there had been a situation where the conversation really went awry, and then the next class, basically I co-facilitated with the professor, kind of creating space to unpack racism. And I think that, you know, I have I guess a leadership role within my cohort, and so there was some level of, okay, I can step up and do this, but I don't really think the burden should, the expectation be that a student needs to step up and co-lead something. I mean, the 48 hours of all of that, I couldn't really focus on other academic work. I was really nervous about that class, thinking about how much of my story should I be sharing. And so, and I think that that's pretty common for other students of color, of having to be leaned on to do that work, and to be forced, maybe not forced, but feel like they have to share their experience to teach their classmates or teach their professors.
Right, it's not a situation where you're volunteering. And I certainly can remember when I was at Notre Dame, there were sometimes just things that were so racist or uncomfortable that were said in the classroom, and then there was nothing. And then you're kind of sitting there like, okay, what do I do about this? And trying to figure out what, you know, whether or not you have the energy to deal with it, or if you're just going to push it to the side. So yeah, completely understand where you're coming from. Rachel, you talked a lot about your experiences also through the retreat, and how that formed your expectations of Notre Dame, helped you acclimate. Give us a picture of what that meant for you, and then talk as well a little bit about the cheerleading piece.
Yeah, of course. So like Helen mentioned, a lot of the Asian and Asian American students at Notre Dame participate in that freshman retreat with AAA. And it was a really great chance to meet people outside of your dorm and outside of your major, because I feel like at Notre Dame, after your freshman year, you kind of just stick with those people you met in the first couple of weeks. And so this was a really great way to expand the friend group outside of those first groups of people you initially met. So with my freshman retreat, some of those people I met there stayed my friends throughout my time at Notre Dame. And I still keep in touch with a lot of them. Some of them were my classmates in my Chinese classes because I minored in Chinese. And so it was a really wonderful way to connect with people from the same racial background as me that you don't really see as often in your day-to-day on campus. But for now, the cheerleading piece, I was a cheerleader at Notre Dame. It was probably my favorite thing that I did on campus, really influenced my time there. I would not change anything about me taking part in the cheerleading team. But when I was trying out, at the time, there was a Filipino girl who was graduating. And there was also a Black girl who was graduating. And so myself and a Black girl made the team, and someone had made a comment that they think that we were kind of filling in those spots of those two graduating girls. And I don't know if they thought we had overheard it, or I don't know if they meant anything malicious by it. Maybe they were trying to make a joke, but it really struck me and the other girl, because we just thought, oh, we made the team. We were so excited to make the team because the Notre Dame cheerleading team isn't very large, and normally it only takes 6 to 7 girls, both from Notre Dame and St. Mary's. So it's a pretty competitive process. And when you make the team, you feel a sense of accomplishment at doing that and becoming a part of this community. And so that kind of put a damper on that initial excitement. But besides that one experience at the beginning, I don't think I ever heard another comment like that afterward. So luckily, the rest of my time on the cheerleading team was really wonderful.
Wonderful. All right, Michelle, who has been at Notre Dame for 5 years now, after 20 years in London, correct? And
that's correct.
Originally from the Netherlands. Your wife is Chinese and your son mixed race, and you're set into Notre Dame. Tell us about what it's like to come in, given your background, and how you acclimated, how your family acclimated into Notre Dame.
Sure. It was, well, you know, South Bend is a little different from London. But, you know, at this stage in our life, I mean, for Helen, my wife, and for myself, I mean, we didn't necessarily have to be in a bustling, you know, mega city. We were quite happy that, you know, we could be in a place where the real estate is a bit more affordable and you get a bit more space, and the work pressure is also a little bit less than in, you know, crazy workaholic London. So in that sense, it was, you know, it was very positive in terms of the sort of material conditions of work. Notre Dame, I mean, the place where I used to work, SOAS, is a very small university that is the only university in the world that only teaches about Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. So it doesn't matter which department you're in, whether you're in political science or law or literature, you only do Asia, Africa, Middle East. So it's as least Eurocentric as you can get, and it's a really small, committed community of scholars who want to make a difference in the world. So in that sense, it's actually very similar to Notre Dame, except that the inspiration at Notre Dame comes from Catholicism, whereas it's fair to say that where I taught in London, the inspiration probably came from socialism. Right? But these two are not unrelated either. So
no, they're not.
They're not. But I come from a Catholic family. My father was a Catholic, the headmaster of a Catholic school, so I felt it was almost like coming back to my roots in that sense. And so, but yeah, I think in terms of, you know, both for, I mean, our son Dylan, he when he was in London, maybe it was because he was much younger, but still, I mean, he was never referring to himself in terms of race. And within a year after coming to the US, he was referring to himself as the Asian kid, even though he's half, you know, he's half Asian, half white. But that sort of, he'd found his way of defining himself, or maybe others had defined him like that. So,
and
otherwise,
it forces you to make a choice, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, sometimes he was literally forced to make a choice. I remember when he needed to be fingerprinted for his green card, and they made him fill in a form, and he had to choose his race or ethnicity. And he said, "Can I choose two?" And they said, "No, you have to choose one." And it's like a 13-year-old turning to me and saying, "Which one should I choose?" And I really didn't want to force him to choose.
Right.
So yeah, it's. But I mean, professionally, it was. It's been a challenge, but a good challenge. I knew when I came here that, of course, Asian studies was not an area that Notre Dame was very strong in, but I also knew that they were really committed to making a change in terms of internationalizing their curriculum, setting up, you know, the Keough School of Global Affairs, and in that sense, in the sense of the, you know, the study of the geographical area that we call Asia, that they have been making that change. So the year before I arrived, the history department hired 2 people doing Chinese history. The political science department hired an additional person doing Chinese politics. And since then, since I arrived, a total of 15 Asianists in different departments, but a lot of them in global affairs have been hired. So that's really a massive increase in terms of that.
What do the numbers look like university-wide for faculty? Do you know?
Which you mean?
You said Asianist. How many, do you know the numbers for faculty on?
So we have, the Leo Institute has 85 faculty fellows. Not all of them would refer to themselves as Asianists. So those who do research on Asia would refer to themselves as Asianists, but some of our fellows are, for instance, people in the sciences and engineering who are themselves originally from Asia and do research projects that involve partners in Asia. So it depends on how you define it, but it's the numbers have gone up considerably.
For Asian and Pacific Islanders, you're looking. You said 15 are specifically dedicated to studying Asia, and then
so 15 new ones were added to what perhaps a dozen or so that were already there. So it's a big increase. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the Liu Institute, just the background, the history of it.
Sure. So the Liu family is a Taiwanese American family from California, and they had 2 children, Emily and Justin, who studied at Notre Dame. I think Henry might know Emily. I think you probably around the same time. Emily, I think, graduated in 93 or 94, and Justin graduated in 2000. And they had a very similar experience to what others have been saying. So they absolutely loved Notre Dame, but at the same time, they were somewhat, they were aware that there weren't that many Asian students at Notre Dame. They were involved in the AAA as well. Also, I think their parents were somewhat disappointed that when they went back to Taiwan or when they went to China for business, that nobody seemed to know what Notre Dame was. So these 2 motivations sort of came together, that on the one hand, the family thought Notre Dame should be better known in Asia, and on the other hand, they felt Notre Dame should have more of an Asian component on its own campus. And that led to the family giving a very generous gift in 2010 to set up what was then to be called the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies. So it was always not just Asian studies, but also the engagement with Asia, always those 2 things together. And the gift was given 10 years ago now, and then the institute opened its door in 2013 under an acting director, Nelson Mark, Henry's distant cousin, I believe. And then while Nelson was in charge, they carried out an international search, and I was the lucky person to be chosen to become the first director. And since then, we've just been trying to, in all kinds of ways, to increase the presence of Asia on campus, and to also reach out to communities in Asia. And this year in particular, because it's the 10th anniversary of the endowment, we had already planned to pay more attention to the Asian American community. So to celebrate the Liu family, and through them to celebrate that community. And then, of course,
right. And
we know that it would become the most important thing we have done throughout the year.
Right, right. And we're going to get to that a little bit later in the program. Let's switch and talk a little bit about the efforts at Notre Dame towards diversity and inclusion. And I'm going to sort of open this up to all of you to address to the extent that you know. How are they doing? There was a petition that went forward last summer, basically about the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and maybe a chief diversity officer. And then a task force was formed. And in the wake of that, I certainly see some things happening. what do you see on campus as happening, and what are you hearing through the alumni circles? And this is open to anyone who'd like to answer. Don't all jump at once.
Well, since I'm on campus, I could say a few things about
Okay.
what's. Well, I'm not the only one on campus, but yeah, I could say a few things. So the task force is working, and Justin Leo is on the task force. So, and what I hear from him is that they're having regular meetings with groups of faculty and staff from different backgrounds. And then at the same time, I think because of everything that's happened in the past year, I think pretty much every single department and every single unit on campus is now having conversations about diversity. And so, say, like my wife works in the IT department, and they are just this week, I believe, they're organizing a session where all 200 members of the OIT department are invited to meet with an Asian American faculty member who grew up in Iowa and is going to just sort of talk to them about what it was like for him growing up as an Asian American in the Midwest and then still living and working here. And so I think everybody's really trying very hard in a way that I haven't seen in the previous years that I was here.
Okay, good. And Rachel, could you speak a little bit about the new initiative on race and resilience that started in January?
Yes, I can, but I think Charlotte wanted to chime in first. So
I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand up, Charlotte. Go for it. I'm glad Rachel is paying attention. She's like, she's an expert at these panels.
Great. I'll just, I guess, add maybe from the student perspective. And I think our time here is, just a drop in the bucket compared to faculty and administrators and staff and what they see. And so I think, that's the lens that I see this as only my 10 months that I'm here. And I think that you're right, there are lots of conversations that are happening on campus. And I think that there are new pressures in the world to look at our institution and individual colleges and how we are being proactive and reactive to things that are happening in the world and on campus. But I think from my perspective, I see a lot of emphasis on increasing diversity, and there's still maybe a disconnect of what inclusion and equity would look like on campus if we were to actually increase the number of students who represent different backgrounds. And I think that's a lot of the work that some committees that I've been on within Mendoza have been talking to our administrators about is, okay, so let's say we do have more Asian students be a part of this program or be a part of Mendoza, which support staff are going to be there to help unpack their experience in the culture shock, which our faculty members having the right cultural competency training to be able to engage in classes and in conversation in a way that's productive. How are you going to provide resources for programming so that it isn't just on these students to be the ones to share their experiences, or people can engage in that way. And so I think that there are conversations about how to allocate resources. And I think from my perspective as well, and I guess I'll speak for myself. And sometimes this year I felt a little disappointed on maybe feeling like the institution has been delayed in responses to what's happening in the world, and I think that specifically with anti-Asian hate and sentiments of already feeling maybe invisible or unseen, it hurts more when it doesn't feel like your faculty or your staff or administrators are taking the time to acknowledge what was going on. And I think about when the Atlanta shooting happened, it was silent for weeks. I had one faculty member reach out to me and say that they were thinking about me and wondering how they could hold space. But nothing from the president until weeks later, nothing from our dean, a few acknowledgements from classmates, but it was the bubble of South Bend is abundantly clear, and you see other Asian students carrying the weight of feeling like they saw people who look like them, look like their family members, continuously on social media and on the news be murdered, and they were silent. And I think that is unacceptable, and there are levels of accountability that I think we should expect from an institution that's mission is rooted in justice and how to love other people better. So yeah, but like I said, it feels, my time here is so short, and a lot of these initiatives, we're not done, right? And
we're not done. That's absolutely right. We have a ways to go. So you and Helen both talked about the statement situation after the Atlanta shootings in March. I guess it was March 16th that the shootings occurred, and there was, a month and a half delay or something like that. Tell us what, for you, Charlotte, and for you, Helen, who are there, what message is that sending to you about what's happening in the world? And have you taken it? How have you taken it up to the administration level? Helen, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, personally, I think following the shooting, I was very proud of the response from the AAPI students on campus in regards to, advocating for, for a statement from the university for action to be taken. Personally, I know of 2 different petitions that went around. One was, I think, initiated by Asian faculty on campus and, circulated around the faculty and staff. And the other was through AAA. We partnered with Asian American associations at various universities around the country to form a sort of coalition and release a joint statement as well. But I agree with Charlotte when I say that I was a little disappointed with the delay in responses from the administration, especially. Personally, I think the support from MSPS and from campus ministry has been great following the Atlanta shootings, especially. I think campus ministry worked closely with AAA to put on several prayer services and reflective and to hold, reflective spaces for students to come together and, talk about, their thoughts and feelings on the rise in AAPI and anti-Asian hate in the country. But
were those utilized? Did you have good attendance?
Yeah, there was a big showing to one of the prayer services that we had with campus ministry. And, it was clear that, the students, there was a lot of frustration with the administration and a lot of fear over, what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my family. And, it was clear that there was a lot that needed to be talked about, but I wasn't sure if there was enough, resources being put out for students outside of just campus ministry and MSPS.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I know in the course of writing the letters back and forth, there was a request for a statement, which ultimately did come. And I think the first statement came out of the Lew Institute. Correct, Michelle?
I think so. So we issued a statement on March the 18th, 2 days after the Atlanta shootings, and I must take responsibility for not making the statement even earlier. I got it wrong initially. My Asian American colleagues within the Institute came to me already on the 17th saying we must issue a statement now, and I had the typical wrong reaction saying, oh, the police are saying it's not racially motivated, and Father Jenkins hasn't done anything. So, and then they sort of looked at me and didn't say very much, and I just yeah, I think then I woke up later that day or early the next day, and I started
You're
seeing.
now woke.
Yeah,
Good.
I guess. You know, you think you don't have a problem, and then you realize you do have a problem, right? And then and I noticed the fear around me. I mean, in my family and people I talked to, I noticed the disappointment that was immediately sort of starting to build, especially when other universities started to issue statements already the next day. When St. Mary's issued a statement the next day, and Notre Dame did nothing, right? That's
We have to do better.
yeah, that's
Must
when
do
it hit
better.
me. And then we issued the statement, and then since then I've just humbly put myself behind all the efforts that Asian American colleagues and students have been undertaking, and just doing my bit in trying to persuade the administration to make an appropriate response. And I'm very happy that the response eventually came, and that it came in time for AAPI Heritage Month. I think that's sort of a nice way to come back to doing the right thing in a sense. So.
You do worry, though, that if it takes this much for a statement, what about all the other asks that are out there and that are in that letter, and how quickly those will be handled? I hope, as students and faculty to continue, and alumni, I hope donors as well continue to press these points that we will make progress. Let's switch our attention a little bit. We have, this is a New York event. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in New York, Rachel and Henry. There's the highest number of hate crimes have occurred in New York, the reporting has shown, in part because of, population, but also because of the makeup of the city, just how close everybody is, right? And it's not spread out like South Bend. Tell us a little bit about what's happening and what you're feeling in New York, and whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. Pre-pandemic, the city is always bustling. There's a ton of people. You never necessarily feel like you're in danger. Crime was at an all-time low at one point in time, but come the pandemic, the city is completely empty. Mental health is an issue, and with all of the anti-Asian rhetoric that occurred in the last year, that has not helped the situation. And I think that even being a big guy like myself, 6'2", I walk down the street. I've never, ever in my entire life felt like I needed to turn back and take a second look. I do that today. And, I'm not worried about myself because I can handle myself, but I'm worried about, for my children, worried for my wife. I'm worried for, the old lady who's in Chinatown, who's just trying to go get her medicine or buy groceries. I'm worried for my parents, who are, elderly, and you don't know what's going to happen. And so I think that, it's gotten to that point where everyone is, thinking, could it be me next? And so you're definitely watching out there.
Yeah, I agree with Henry. And the thing is, already last year, before everything even shut down, our club actually organized a couple of events in Chinatown for Lunar New Year. And already we could see that things were kind of starting to change, like the language that people would use to describe Chinese Americans or Chinatown, like saying, oh, we're going to get the virus down here. Don't eat Chinese food. Don't eat at a Chinese restaurant. And Chinatown is one of the big tourist destinations, and people come to visit New York City, and all of a sudden it's empty. A lot of different initiatives started out once things did shut down, because a lot of restaurants and business, of course, are closing during COVID, but especially the Asian businesses, just because of that bias that some people had, because they have these beliefs that you're more likely to catch COVID at an Asian business than at any other business, which is ridiculous. So I know one example is an organization called Send Chinatown Love, where they raised a lot of money for Chinatown businesses, especially ones that are small, just mom and pop shops, so then they could stay open during COVID, because people were still collecting their rent. Like, you have to still be able to pay to actually own a business in New York. And that was one. And like Henry described, you didn't really think that this would happen in New York, like the amount of hate crimes towards Asians in New York would happen. As a small Asian girl, I never felt unsafe in New York. That's actually something that my Notre Dame friends would always talk about while I was on campus is, why do you like New York so much? Like, isn't it scary? There's so many people. Isn't it unsafe? And honestly, I never felt unsafe before this past year. Just walking down the street, I would take the subway at 2, 3 a.m. by myself, no worries. But nowadays, like, it's scary to travel alone as an Asian person. One of the other initiatives that started was a Asian American in New York City started this thing called Cafe Maddie Cab. She started raising money for people who were Asian women, Asian LGBTQ, or Asian elderly in the city who needed cab money, because it's expensive to go to wherever they needed to be, whether it be a doctor's appointment or to school or to work, because they felt unsafe riding the subway. And so she raised like hundreds of thousands of dollars for that.
And she continues to raise money for that purpose.
That you can Venmo at
Remarkable.
event. We'll have a list of resources that people can donate to or just learn more about. If you have any questions, oh, by the way, you can submit them in the description box of this YouTube live stream. There is a Google form, and we will be answering those later. So
I forgot to say that. I apologize,
no
Rachel.
worries.
That was my responsibility, my fail. So let's talk a little bit more about what's going on throughout the country. Helen, what's happening with your family in California? And Charlotte, what's happening with your family in Cincinnati?
I think personally, with my family, we live in a very Asian area. There are a lot of immigrants from East Asia, especially. And prior to the start of the coronavirus, I wasn't too worried for them. They had the support of the community, family, friends, all lived there. But even in such an Asian American community, there have been multiple instances of racial slurs being shouted on the street. And so definitely I'm worried for my parents, and luckily for me, my grandparents don't live here, but I'm worried definitely for my parents and for even my friends back home who are still in California.
How about you, Charlotte?
Yeah, so my family's in a few different places across the country. My cousins and aunt and uncle live in the Bay Area, where there are a lot of other Filipino folks and Asian people. And so I think even though I think my concern for them is still high, because those are cities that have also had increased Asian hate crime as well. But I think my mom is the only non-white person that lives in our neighborhood in Cincinnati. And last year there was an incident at the grocery store that we've been going to, where people were telling her to go home, to leave the U.S., which is scary to think about. And I think a few months ago, I had some concerns about if I really wanted my family to come to commencement here in South Bend. I mean, imagine in your own town where you live, and you have hate and disrespect there, then coming to South Bend, where I see few Asian folks off of campus. And so they will be coming, but I definitely had concerns.
It's unnerving. The general level of fear throughout the country. And I think it's important for people to understand that the media isn't covering as much as it should be. let's discuss a little bit about the media and what its role should be in this moment. Who would like to start there?
I can chime in. Luckily, in New York, a lot of these crimes are reported and actually covered by the news. I don't know if it's more covered now just because seeing Asian in the headlines gets them more clicks for their news networks, but definitely it is more reported here in New York. I'm worried about places that aren't as focused on these issues that are happening, because someone had mentioned, I think it was you, Juliet, that said that when that dismemberment of that man in Fort Wayne had happened, you didn't even hear about it in your local news, which is truly atrocious. But in New York, we saw it. And now that makes me wonder, where else in the country are people not hearing about these things happening? And that's what a lot of the protests were about in New York City when the hate crimes were on the rise, where Asian people need a voice. They need their stories told, because you can't keep sweeping these things under the rug. A lot of times there's the stereotype that Asian people are quiet. They just like go with the flow. They don't want to make a scene. And so now they want people to recognize that that's not the case, that we are human just like you. And when these things are happening, they should be reported at the same level that you would report any other incident or murder that would happen in the country.
Well, and, finding the voices and collaborating with other BIPOC groups to make sure that those voices are heard, and with the white community as well, obviously. Let's talk a little bit about, Charlotte, you had something to say.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that, language and headlines are really important in how framing. And I think about the Atlanta shooting, and we instantly knew so much about the shooter, and the stories of the victims and their names were not even acknowledged or shared until days later. And I think that I just remember the first 24 hours, and I think it took a really long time for there to even be an acknowledgement that this was an anti-Asian hate crime. And I think that it is the responsibility of the media to tell a more accurate story of this is what happened. These are the facts, and not and also just maybe to stop humanizing the shooters in the ways that they're doing, and kind of refocus on I think refocusing it would be better.
Well, and the same thing happened with the FedEx shooting in Indianapolis, with the killing of 4 Sikh men. We're not getting the information about the victims. We are finding all this information about, the shooter. And what does that look like? I know after the Aurora shooting here, one of the father of one of the victims basically came forward, saying, would you please just stop giving them the publicity? We don't want to see their faces. We realize you may need to use their names, but stop showing their faces, because it just gives them the pub that they want. So let's switch gears a little bit, because I see we are getting close on time. Let's talk a little bit about your individual feelings on how you're using your power and privilege, and what you suggest that our viewers can do, both on campus and in your own communities. And we can do what Edward suggested. We could try to do a bit of a lightning round here. So Henry, I'm just going to go around the clock. And Henry, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So, in the last year, obviously you're sitting at home and you're hearing about all this, and just making you want to do more, or connect more with the Asian community. So one of the things that I've done is join the organizations such as the National Association of Asian Professionals. Yes, that could be a good networking thing, but it's just connecting with other people who I can relate to on this topic, getting involved with, the APIA Scholars Program, and continuing to support like the Chinatown YMCA. I mean, where they have services and programs that help support the Asian community. I think, I recommend to my friends, support Asian businesses here in New York. Go to Chinatown, go to Koreatown, spend money there. It's alive and it's open. It's just, not as alive as it needs to be. So, my wife and I, we go down there, we, buy Sunday night dinners, and, we hang out there just to kind of explore, because it's not going to be empty forever, but they need people there.
Yes. Helen, what are you doing with your power and privilege as a junior at Notre Dame? Actually, you're doing a lot already. You've already talked about it in terms of heading up the Asian American Association.
Yeah, definitely.
Go
The
ahead,
Asian American Association and the AAA community here on campus, we're doing all that we can to increase awareness in the greater Notre Dame student body of these issues, and the anti-Asian hate that's been going on in the past year. And personally, I'm really proud of some of the things that our community members have done. We had a senior who started a roundtable discussion every week with members of the AAA community and the Notre Dame community to provide a space and time to sit down and talk about these issues, and come up with some action points going forward, that things we'd like to see from the administration in terms of supporting students of color and minority students. But going forward, I'd definitely like to see, more collaboration between groups here on campus and off campus, and just general allyship when it comes to things like these, the events that have happened in the past year.
Have you seen, a good turnout from your white peers and other BIPOC communities at your events?
Personally, in AAA events, not really. And this is something that we've been trying to address, I think, for the past few years. Like, how do we encourage more participation outside the AAA community? That's definitely something that that we're still working on. But
Okay.
yeah.
All right, Charlotte, you're up.
Yeah, I'm also in a unique position, I think, being half Asian, half white, and having a lot of white passing power in terms of using my voice and privilege in this to advance this work and to amplify other voices. So at school this year, really partnering with administrators in our program on some of these DEI initiatives to help with recruitment. What types of questions are we asking applicants to not only increase the diversity, but also to weed out white supremacists and folks who aren't interested in contributing positively to the community, working on how to integrate anti-racism work within our curriculum. And then I think about when I will start doing executive search, being the gatekeeper to people who will be holding positions for, might be the first Asian woman to hold that position, and working with search committees to remove bias and really open doors, I think, is how I see my role there, and creating some equity in the process. But I think on a personal...
Can I stop you there on that? Because we never
Sure.
got back to the executive search discussion. Could you just talk a little bit about the glass cliff concept that you told me about?
Yes.
Not the glass ceiling, but the glass cliff.
Yes. So there are some behavioral economists who have done some research on when a organization or a company is in maybe financial trouble or there's some organizational challenges, they're more likely to hire a woman or a person of color to move into that role, and therefore more likely to fail and then kind of reset back to a white man to take that role. Like, oh, we tried hiring a woman, we tried hiring
It didn't work
a
out.
person of color, and it didn't work out. And so that's the glass cliff phenomenon that I think there's some research.
Thank you.
But yeah.
I interrupted you though. What you were going to say something else about what you're doing with your power?
Yeah. I just think the last thing is, there's so much learning and unlearning that needs to happen in this work, both about learning about our history that's very untold, in understanding how different groups of people have been pitted against themselves within American history, and understanding how to show up better for other communities of color, like Black people, for example, and showing up for them. And so I think that that's something that's a part of this, and how we can find ways to work together instead of let these systems that want us to be in silos, that we should be working together more and amplifying those voices more.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michelle, I know that through the Liu Institute, you've been, co-sponsoring some programming. Talk a little bit about that, and then, about your personal efforts.
Sure. So, yeah, so we had programming, especially last month. We had a number of events specifically dedicated to discussing anti-Asian discrimination and violence. And we had the first event featured 5 Asian American female scholars and students. I think it's probably the first time that any panel on anything at Notre Dame consisted of only of 5 Asian women, and that, I think, was a very very powerful event. So they didn't just talk about their research, but also about their own experiences, their families' experiences. They read out the names of the victims and so on, and just talked about the fear and the anger. And then a few weeks down the line from that, we had a second event where we colleagues who study these things talked about the history of Chinese exclusion, the history of the Filipino community, the history of the myth of the model minority. All these things are really educational. I mean, I learned a great deal from that, and I hope other people did as well. And what sort of was encouraging, that for both these events we got an enormous number of co-sponsors. I mean, we weren't the only organizers. So we worked with with gender studies, with American studies, with civil and human rights, with peace studies, with global affairs, with you name it. All of them. We had 8, 9, 10 partners, and so that again, I think, shows that change is happening. So we'll continue doing that. But on top of that, I mean, as the director and as as a professor and someone who was hired especially to bring about change, I want to turn my attention especially now to the curriculum. And when I say the curriculum, I don't mean our little program in Asian studies. I mean making sure that knowledge of Asia is part of everybody's curriculum at Notre Dame, right? And that's
part of the history.
There's still a way to go there, but and I have many efforts, I should mention, ongoing about changing the core curriculum so that it not only includes more diversity, but also specifically includes knowledge about anti-racism. Right? So I'm hopeful that change will come, but it will take time. Yeah.
Well, and along those lines, I noticed that the new initiative for race and resilience, they have offered up a grant, a $3,000 grant to any faculty member or graduate student who can put together curriculum on race issues, on culture issues, on equity issues. I don't know how much that normally goes for. You know, 3,000 sounds decent, but but I love that it's out there, that they're encouraging folks to do the work.
And that initiative came together in a year. I mean, it's really incredibly impressive what they've achieved in just a year's time. I think so. I think I am hopeful that things are changing, but we still need a lot of things to happen.
We're not done. Rachel.
Oh, okay. So actually, I kind of do a combination of what everyone has mentioned with like supporting local businesses, creating and sharing events. As a member and a leader in my local alumni club, I hope other alumni do the same thing, where they do participate in these events to learn and just support these people of color in their communities. And also, you have a lot of power in changing the landscape of Notre Dame. Alumni clubs are really integral to the outreach to local high school students and recruiting those local high school students to potentially come to Notre Dame. And so any alumni who are watching this, if you are not involved with your local alumni club, I highly encourage you to, and you can go and visit these local high schools and their high school college fairs and share your Notre Dame experience, share how wonderful it is and how much of an impact a Notre Dame education can be, because those stories and your experience can make someone who might not have thought to apply to Notre Dame actually consider going. That's something that I really am passionate about here in New York, visiting my local high schools, especially ones that don't typically send students to Notre Dame, so schools in Harlem, or even my own high school. I grew up here in New York City. Usually only 2 kids from my school go to Notre Dame every year, but in the past few years, it's been a lot more because of outreach from Notre Dame and also from alumni who want these successful students to also take part in the Notre Dame experience. So that I think is something that a lot of alumni can do to help as well.
And the Notre Dame New York Club is a perfect example of the coalition, you know, building that's happening, you know, across cultures and BIPOC communities, as well as LGBTQ. So it's remarkable to be, you know, part of their discussions, and just the energy, you know, the constant energy that's put towards these efforts. So, you know, so much admiration. I see we're getting a little bit short of time. Rachel, unfortunately, the device where I'm supposed to read my questions from, it has died. So do you have, can you see the questions?
Yes, I can. So there weren't really many that came through. One question had to do with NYPD. So they said that NYPD retirements are up 75% year on year. What types of community outreach are underway with law enforcement? So here in New York, I don't think that there is a requirement for there to be more outreach with our local law enforcement. I think more resources should be allocated towards community support. Especially like Henry mentioned with the mental health issues in New York City, a lot more resources can be better allocated to helping those people get the treatment and resources they need to actually get better, or make sure they're not just wandering around, potentially attacking people. And I don't think, say, arresting them would actually fix anything. So I don't think that community outreach with law enforcement is the highest priority. It should be more making sure our resources are going towards things that can actually benefit everyone and make change rather than trying to bury a problem.
Right, right. I remember there was another question that had come through from someone who is an Indian student, or was an Indian student at Notre Dame, who described the phenomenon of hanging out with other, you know, folks from the Asian community and having a white person, you know, whispering, you know, oh, you know, those Asians always, you know, sit together. They, you know, they're exclusive. and how one as a student deals with those issues. I'm going to open that up to the panel. What do you all think? How would you respond? What would you advise? Charlotte, I see you.
I'll say something.
Oh, go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I was fortunate not to have experienced that myself, but, you know, just thinking of those students and what they had to endure, you know, I think my number one thing is, I think a lot of people don't think that Asians would speak out. And I think that's the first thing that I would do, is kind of pivot back to that group and just ask them a question as to, well, why are you sitting together? If you're, you know, both white, is there a problem? What kind of problem do you have? You know, because I think that really surprises them when you actually come back with the response. And I think that's more powerful.
Thank you. Anyone else on that question that came through? Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions, Rachel, that are in the mix?
No, no one else submitted any other questions. So Juliet, I don't know if you have any more for us. There's so many more things to talk about.
Yes, there are. And hopefully we can, you know, reconvene for that purpose. We are running out of time, and I know that Rona wants to come in and make some closing remarks. Thank you all. This has been incredibly helpful, very enlightening, and I hope that we together can make a difference on this issue. Rachel, you had some resources that you were going to put up, were you not?
Yes, I do have a list of resources that will actually be shared both in the YouTube description and also will be emailed out to everyone who had registered for this event, and also everyone on the NDNY mailing list. It will also be shared with everyone on this panel to share with their communities, where we will list different things you can take part in. So it can be free bystander intervention training, all of the different fundraisers that are happening with Cafe Maddie or with Send Chinatown Love, as well as resources on what the university is doing. So a link to the Notre Dame initiative on race and resilience. So that way people can learn more about what Notre Dame is doing to try to make a difference.
Thank you. And Rona, I think the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Juliet. I just want to say thank you again to you, Juliet, for always doing such a great job with leading our discussions. I'm going to call you like the Oprah of our NDNY Beyond the Comfort Zone series, where you always deliver. So thanks, Juliet. And thank you also to our panelists, Rachel, Michelle, Henry, Charlotte, and Helen, for taking the time to participate in this evening's panel and for sharing your experiences with us. I want to just give a quick plug also for some of the events that we have going on for the rest of this month for AAPI Heritage Month. The APA board has also organized 2 other events that are coming up this month. One on May 26th, we are hosting an Asian Pacific Forum, which will be an open discussion and dialogue for Notre Dame alumni, students, and friends. That will be from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Everybody is welcomed. You don't have to be Asian, FYI. Also on May 29th, we are hosting our first ever We Are API ND Arts Festival. And this is actually really exciting because we have a great lineup of just different alumni who will share their talents and their creativity through various types of performances. That will be from 3 to 5 p.m. again on May 29th. So definitely look out for that. All of this information is available through social media so check out our Facebook, Instagram at APA ND. That's all I have. So again, thank you for joining us in celebrating our AAPI Heritage Month. I don't know if anybody else wants to add last comments. Oh, you're in.
Wonderful.
I
Well,
think
thank you.
we're good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all again for watching. If you are currently still watching, don't forget to subscribe and like this video as well. See you all at our next event.